we'll move on to the next one, who's BJ Farrar, the Senior Mount Maker of Decorative Arts and Conservation at the Getty Villa. Welcome up to stage.
Good afternoon. It's great to see such an amazing turnout today. No idea that it would be quite this well attended, but thank you for coming. It's great to see everybody here. As Helen mentioned, I work at the Getty Museum with Mac, and we started the Mount Forum 7-8 years ago as a desire to connect with our colleagues who we felt ultimately disconnected from, and in a hope that we could create a network and an exchange of ideas that would allow us to grow as a profession. So my presentation, and I apologize if it's a little dry, is just a brief recap of kind of what we've accomplished as a group trying to organize over the past 7 years. The IMF has evolved amazingly into a professionally recognized conference, and hopefully a group that will create a strong network of mount making professionals. The first conference, as Mac mentioned, was at the Getty Villa back in 2008. It was organized by all the mount makers at the Getty Museum. It was a one-day conference, which ultimately turned out to be a huge success. We had no idea what our feedback would be from this. As Mac mentioned, we called everybody that we knew, and those we didn't, we tried to seek out. And ultimately, we had over 100 attendees and 11 presentations. The topics covered everything from large-scale projects to individual case studies, as well as fabrication techniques and different mount-making methods. The conference concluded with an open invitation to make this into something more than a one-time event, which has happened. And it was great because after the conference, there was an informal get-together of the day's presenters and sitting, having drinks, brainstormed where this could go. And it ultimately became what we sort of refer to as our ad hoc directional committee. And the conference in the end really generated a lot of enthusiasm for mount making as a profession. Soon after the conference, we realized that we needed to keep the momentum of the conference going, and it seemed the best way to do this would be to create an easy way for fellow mount makers to connect with each other. And so we came up with an idea of creating just a very informal listserv, which we ended up using Google Groups for. And this way, people can post topics, questions, different methods, job postings. It's proved to be a very valuable way of getting information out to our colleagues. And currently, as of I think today, we probably have about 370 participants, which it seems to be growing all the time. The second IMF was held at the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C. in May of 2010. And our colleague Shelley Euler and her colleagues at the Smithsonian Institution quickly stepped up to the challenge of organizing this event. It was very well attended, with over 250 participants, probably the largest to date, and from with people attending from all over the US, Canada, England, and Japan and Australia. The conference now was expanded into a two-day event with speakers on the first day and poster presentations on the second day, including numerous behind-the-scene tours. The first day's presentations were recorded and webcast, which was fantastic. It brought a whole new dimension to the forum. This allowed people who couldn't physically attend see the presentations, and it also made the presentations available as an archived thing that can be accessed from years forward. It was great planning and execution of the conference, and the dedication of Shelley and her colleagues brought the forum to a whole new level and exposure. Again, the ad hoc directional committee met informally and began to discuss what the next forum should be and where. And so we started talking to various individuals during the conference to see where this might lead. The third IMF was hosted at the Field Museum in Chicago in April of 2012. It was hosted and organized by Pamela Gable and her colleagues. And from this point, there had been two prior conferences, so the former hosts had lent their logistical and planning information to Pam, and which helped with her organization of the event. The conference was well attended and again had close to 200 participants from over 5 countries. There were 9 speakers and 12 poster presentations. And the interesting aspect of this conference was that it was being hosted by a natural history museum. And coming from an art institution, I don't have a lot of interaction with the natural history group. And this was amazing and was a fantastic integration between 2 parallel mount-making groups. The conference followed the successful 2-day format of the previous forum. And again, there was a lot of enthusiasm generated by the conference. This time, the ad hoc committee had a little more of a formal meeting and really tried to see where we were going with this and what we could do to move the group forward. And it was a good session, and we have come up with a lot of ideas that some we've implemented, some we would have yet to be put in place, but it's great. And again, there was a search during the conference who might be a good candidate to host the next forum, and so there were many informal discussions that took place during that time. Shortly after the second IMF and the enthusiasm that that conference generated, we were approached by AIC, the American Institute for Conservation, to present presentations that were made at the other conferences to be compiled into their journal for conservation. This was organized by Shelley Euler, and ultimately 10 articles were chosen for publication. Many were, as I mentioned, from previous presentations made at the past forums. After many peer reviews and edits, the final issue was published in 2012 in the spring and summer issue. And for mount making, this was a huge coup. The entire issue was dedicated to mount making, which had never happened before. And again, the project really spurred an ongoing and supportive relationship with AIC. And this relationship continued further when AIC moved to make a lot of their information a little more accessible through a conservation wiki site. And we were invited to participate in this and create a mount making section within the website. And this, again, is organized by Shelley, who I don't know what we would do without her ceaseless efforts. But it has turned out to be a great place to start having basic mount making information truly accessible, and also allowed us to create an archive for the past IMF presentations. And this is very much a work in progress. It's just getting started, and I would encourage you to check it out. And it's a collaborative effort, and it has a lot of promise. The fourth IMF took place at the New Mexico History Museum in May of 2014. The conference was organized by Paul Singleton and his colleagues at the New Mexico Department of Cultural Affairs. As with the prior conferences, again, all the former hosts have chipped in with any useful information, and no sense in reinventing things over and over again, which always seems to help for the current planning. The conference followed a two-day format, which now seems to be kind of a standard format, with speaker presentations on the first day and poster presentations and tours on the second day. This IMF had a slightly lower turnout than the previous conferences, which was unfortunate. And we think this might have been due to the fact that there were some issues with the website for registering, and possibly for just not keeping information constantly posted about the conference and call for papers. So it was a good lesson for us to learn to make sure that we really follow through, making sure that the information for the conferences gets out. Like the IMF in Washington, D.C., this one, all the presentations were recorded and webcast and are accessible now. It was great. And I'm really hoping that this becomes a standard for all future conferences. It really makes sense. It's certainly more effort, but I think time well spent. It allows the presentations to be accessed at any time past the conference. During the IMF in Santa Fe, we had an opportunity to approach a colleague of ours, Philip Bruntz from the Cleveland Art Museum, who's been very active in the forum since its inception, and he seemed like a logical choice to host the next forum. And I'm happy to say that has moved forward, and dates have recently been announced for May 4th and 5th of next year. And thankfully, Philip and his colleagues have been able to move this forward, and the directional committee has offered their assistance and knowledge, and planning is underway. So we're looking forward to this being a really good conference next year. And that brings us here to London. This is amazing, and I have to admit that when Mac and I were thinking about this years ago, I had no idea that we would get to this point, but it's fantastic to see. And I have to say that just even with the Kickstart event today, this will have huge impacts, positive impacts for our profession. I'd like to personally thank Helen and Sam and their colleagues who've taken their time to organize this event today, because without their efforts, our group really wouldn't be moving forward. And their efforts will go a long way in building our community, and the possibility of a conference here in London in the near future is very, very exciting. So in conclusion, over the last 7 years, the IMF has become a great resource for mount making. Now mount makers, whether from a small or large institution, in any location, have the ability to connect and to share ideas. While the group remains very grassroots at this point and not directly affiliated with any organization, dedication from our members and past conference hosts have kept the whole process moving forward. Our methods tend to be somewhat organic and lack a formal structure, but in terms of the conferences, so far this seems to be working remarkably well, and it allows each host to make the conference more of their own. I think the future of the IMF looks really bright. In a relatively short amount of time, the dedication and sustained efforts of our group have and will continue to elevate our profession, allowing mount makers internationally to gain a strong and unified professional voice. Thank you.